Good morning, and welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the broadcast. Before I continue our reading and discussion of this book, The Global Vatican, I want to remind the listeners that yesterday, after Inquisition Update, I was a guest on Nicholas's program, Across the Border. We discussed Bible prophecy and what role the United States plays in Bible prophecy, what role the Vatican plays. Our focus was particularly Revelation chapter 13. And I encourage all the listeners to check out the archives page and listen to that program, the first hour of Cross the Border. And, by the way, probably wouldn't hurt you to stand by for the second hour, too. So, thanks to Brother Nicholas for the invitation. It was my blessing to participate. And now we will continue where we left off yesterday in the book, The Global Vatican. This is a public admission, if not a boast, that the Roman Catholic Church, more particularly the Vatican, and even more particularly the papacy, controls foreign and domestic policy, not only for the United States, but the world. And if you're looking for an answer to the question, who and what is the New World Order, you'll find it in this book, The Global Vatican. It's an inside look at the Catholic Church, world politics, and the extraordinary relationship between the United States and the Holy See. It's available from Rowman and Littlefield on major book outlets across the country. Highly recommend this book and encourage those who are interested in this subject to read the book and to share it with others, and most particularly to reference this series of broadcasts on the reading and discussion of this book for a Protestant perspective of the book. Now, yesterday we concluded with a discussion of the grudging end of the grudging end of the Papal Crusade in Vietnam. It was an effort by the papacy in cooperation with the United States, the battle axe of the Pope, to conquer Vietnam, South Vietnam, and use it for a launching base to Catholicize all of Southeast Asia and to claim that part of the world for the Pope. And it was successful, despite the fact that the United States is perceived by many to have lost that war. The winner in that war was the papacy. Now we'll continue in the first full paragraph on page 130. If you're reading along, he said, less than a week later, on May 3rd, Hanoi agreed to negotiate. Predictably, the North Vietnamese preferred to hold talks in a secular location instead of the Vatican, and so the site was changed to Paris. Okay, why Paris? Well, it's one of the strongholds in the Holy Roman Empire for the papacy. And the North Vietnamese were required to come to the Holy Roman Empire to negotiate a peace. After all, the Pope did win. So, Paris, having a history that was not always friendly to the papacy, as we've already read, but Paris was the scene of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, when Catholics butchered in a night, and in the days succeeding, 72,000 or more Protestants. Without warning, without provocation, it was a scene of a massacre that is commemorated on the liturgical calendar of the Roman Catholic Church on September 11th of each year. That, together with the Battle of Lepanto, are commemorated as marking the anniversary date, or at least a common celebration of the slaughter of the Protestants in Paris in the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, and also the Battle of Lepanto, if you prefer to call it that. September 11th. Just look up St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre in the encyclopedia and read. And read about the significance of a mural in the Vatican, a two-part mural in the Vatican depicting both the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre and the Battle of Lepanto and the significance of September 11th. And by the way, tomorrow is September 11th. Another massacre on a Protestant land. Another successful attempt to destroy Protestantism. Now, I know you don't see it that way, and it will take much explanation to get you to see it that way, but I won't take time at this moment. Maybe we'll discuss it on a later broadcast. But I considered September 11th the modern day St. Bartholomew's Massacre, and it marked a change in the United States of America. And by the way, when we continue reading this book, I'm reminding you that all of the history that we're reading now from here on out is post-Vatican Council II. Ecumenism has destroyed the Protestant Reformation. Before the Vatican Council II, there was a modicum of protest from the Protestants in this country. That's why John F. Kennedy and Roosevelt all had to be careful not to seem to give so much deference to the papacy publicly. But listen to the language of this author from this point on, and see if you can detect in this country any caution so as not to provoke the Protestants. Any language articulating a protest launched by Protestantism in this country, and I think you'll find there isn't any. And that just demonstrates what the very purpose of Vatican Council II was. And after Vatican Council II, we immediately established formal diplomatic relations with the Vatican. The Vatican was the winner at Vatican Council II, and Protestantism was essentially, at least politically in this country, buried. Okay? It had assumed room temperature and was buried. No more protest in Washington. No more protest in the churches. No more protests in the streets. Rome is now free to do as she pleases with her United States of America. Now, he says, less than a week later, on May 3rd, Hanoi agreed to negotiate. Predictably, the North Vietnamese preferred to hold talks in a secular location instead of the Vatican, and so the site was changed to Paris, France. Nevertheless, the Pope's invitation served its purpose. The Paris peace talks were long in coming and would be even longer in producing a truce, but they were a start that would have been delayed without the Pope. So the Pope gets all the credit for ending the war in Vietnam when it was in fact his crusade to begin with. All right. Now part 5, the final portion of this chapter. Neither the Pope nor anyone else could seemingly save the United States from the malaise that settled over the country in the late 60s and persisted through the administrations of 3 presidents who came after Johnson. From Vietnam to Richard Nixon's Watergate scandal, followed by a prolonged recession under Gerald Ford, and the ill-fated Jimmy Carter, whose term terminated with the failed attempt to rescue American hostages in Iran, the office of the presidency was diminished, and the prestige of the United States reached a low point around the world. That was another victory for the papacy. Now it says these were years when Holy See U.S. diplomacy became quietly normalized, if not formalized. victory for the papacy. Okay? Formal diplomatic relations with the Vatican. Look, the Cold War has put the Russians on the defensive, and we'll get into that in the next chapter. Vatican Council II has essentially drawn out a surrender from the Protestants, and the Pope's off to the races. Okay? Clear sailing now in the United States for the papacy, and the papacy must be seen around the world as the victor. It says, these were the years when Holy See U.S. diplomacy became quietly normalized, if not formalized. Following in the footsteps of Roosevelt and Truman, Nixon appointed a personal representative to the Pope. As with FDR's appointment of Myron Taylor in 1939, his choice was a distinguished important American leader, Henry Cabot Lodge, a former senator who was Nixon's running mate in 1960 and served under Kennedy and Johnson as ambassador to South Vietnam. So Henry Cabot Lodge was the United States representative to the Roman Catholic regime persecuting the Buddhists in South Vietnam, No Din Diem. Okay, Henry Cabot Lodge is a crusader, a Roman Catholic crusader. Now it says Lodge, like Taylor, visited Rome regularly as Nixon's envoy, taking rooms in the Grand Hotel and working with a small staff. Among other accomplishments, he helped negotiate the departure of Cardinal Mindszenty at last from the American embassy in Budapest. Remember, the Mindszenty led the opposition to the communists, and he was the CIA's man. And they finally got Cardinal Mindszenty put up in the American embassy in Budapest and protected by the American government. That's what your government does. It protects the Roman Catholic Church. And so Cabot Lodge helped to get Mindszenty released and restored to freedom. And it says the United States cooperated with the Holy See to secure Catholic holy sites in Jerusalem. And this was a comment that I made on Nicholas's program yesterday, that we're going to get into the significance of Jerusalem to the Vatican's phony fulfillment of the 70th week of Daniel. The primary interest of the Vatican is Jerusalem, simply because to fulfill the phony Jesuit interpretation of Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27, which was perfectly and completely fulfilled by Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago, but rejected by the papacy, a papacy that denies that Jesus is the Christ and wants to make the Pope the Christ on the earth, has to re-fulfill the 70th week of Daniel under their interpretation of it. And they interpret Daniel 9:27 to mean that the Antichrist will cause the sacrifices and oblations to cease. That future fulfillment necessitates the need for a modern nation state of Israel. That was accomplished in World War I and World War II. It necessitates the building of a Jewish temple on Temple Mount. That necessity will be provided by the Vatican, because the Vatican in 1993, according to Barry Chamish and his cohort, whose name has escaped me at the moment, was deeded Temple Mount, and now is the possessor, the legal possessor of Temple Mount. So everything that happens on Temple Mount today is under the control and watchful eye of the papacy. And when it's time, then the papacy will put before the world a man. Remember, under the futurist interpretation of Daniel 9:27, the Antichrist isn't a series of popes throughout history. It's a single man. And he will sign a peace treaty with the Jews, allowing them to build a temple and begin animal sacrifices again. Thus, further demonstrating that they deny that Jesus was the Lamb of God. And in the midst of the week, the 7-year period of time, they're going to cause this peace treaty will be discontinued or interrupted in some degree, so that it will cause the sacrifices and oblations to cease. And that's when the whole Christian world, who has been indoctrinated with futurism, will irretrievably be convinced that that is the man that is prophesied in the scripture to be the Antichrist. And however Rome determines how to dispense with this individual, history will have to prove. But when he is out of the way, then the papacy is free to pose itself to Jerusalem and the world as the Christ. That's the intent of the papacy. It has been the intent of the papacy ever since the very beginning, with the title, the Vicar of Christ. That's what they call the Pope, the replacement of Christ on earth. And the main stage, the final act of the papacy, will be Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And it's absolutely important that the Vatican get control of all the unfolding affairs in Jerusalem, and the United States is helping that to happen. Okay? It says the United States cooperated with the Holy See to secure Catholic holy sites in Jerusalem, while the Vatican worked to obtain better communications with American POWs. All right? The Vatican, with the help of the United States, helped the Vatican get control of the holy sites, the so-called holy sites in Jerusalem. Is there anything holy in Jerusalem? If Christ isn't there, it's not holy. You see, Protestantism is not an idolatrous religion. We don't make pilgrimages to so-called holy sites. They're just memorials. We leave that to biblical history, but we are in mourning. Our bridegroom has left, and we are awaiting his return. We're awaiting his return. We don't care about holy sites, so-called holy sites in Jerusalem. Jerusalem has no appeal for a Protestant other than its historical significance in Bible prophecy. And we wait for a future Jerusalem, a new Jerusalem come down from God out of heaven. But the papacy sees it differently, because it's the Antichrist, the Church of Antichrist. And it desires an earthly kingdom, not a heavenly one. It desires an earthly Christ, not a heavenly one. And it's trying to drag as many Bible-believing Christians as possible into that earthly kingdom, which will ultimately be destroyed at Christ's return. The phony futurist fulfillment of Daniel 9:27 is critical to the papacy. It's absolutely essential, by my estimation, that if somehow, through intervention of Bible Christians, this doesn't happen, the Roman Catholic Church and its claim to the Vicar of Christ is worthless. And once again, Protestantism is the gravest threat to the Holy Roman Empire, the gravest threat to the survival of the papacy. If my voice and other Protestant voices are ever listened to in this country and around the world, the papacy's ability to continue this futurist abomination that it is planning for Jerusalem will come to an end. And that just is never going to be allowed to happen. The government of the United States will act upon an uprising declaring the papacy to be the Antichrist, and the futurist fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy a fraud. The United States has a vested interest in the name of Christianity, which they believe is Catholicism, to help this futurist fulfillment take place in the world. If you raise a voice against the futurist fulfillment, against Rome's authority in Jerusalem, you'll be regarded as an enemy of the state. The United States government is completely in the service of the Vatican and has been for a long, long time. And the main goal of all this political wrangling and all the wars is to culminate in the fulfillment of this Jerusalem fraud, all for the purpose of establishing the papacy as the Christ. Now, history is going to either make me a prophet or a liar. But I don't claim to be a prophet. I just claim to be a serious studier of history and of prophecy, and I've come to very logical conclusions. And time will tell. But you need to know that the United States, once called Protestant, cooperated with the Holy See, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the little horn of Daniel, with eyes like eyes of a man and a mouth speaking blasphemies against the Most High. The United States helped that man of sin to secure Catholic holy sites in Jerusalem. You know, they're not Christian holy sites, they're Catholic holy sites. The papacy's going to make a claim to everything called holy in Jerusalem, either by the Christians or the Muslims. They call them Catholic holy sites. Okay? Not Christian holy sites, Catholic holy sites in Jerusalem, while the Vatican worked to obtain better communications with American POWs in North Vietnam. President Ford and Carter both continued the practice of sending envoys to the Vatican. Holy See-U.S. relations covered a wide variety of issues, but the context of all U.S. diplomacy, as it had been since 1945, was the Cold War. Okay, you get the idea that the wars have really never ended, that it's just continual war. The first act was called World War I to accomplish part of the objective. The second was immediately followed it, the Second World War, which achieved even more of the objective, and then we launched directly into the Cold War and the Vietnam War. You just can see the papal bark advancing with each click of the pendulum of the Godfather clock, don't you? All right, the communists were more aggressive during the post-Vietnam era of American vulnerability. The communists were more aggressive during the post-Vietnam era of American vulnerability. The Soviet Union built up its military and pushed its influence into ever wider spheres. Under Nixon, détente brought a short respite in the Cold War, but what followed was even more alarming than what had come before. Quote, "The Soviet collapse in 1991 should not obscure the reality of their challenge in the 1970s, wrote Robert Gates, who worked in high-level positions in both the CIA and the White House during the 70s, and would later serve as both director of the CIA and Secretary of Defense. Robert Gates, a Knight of Malta, Roman Catholic, okay, controlling the CIA, very influential in the Defense Department, served as Director of Defense, and he's the papacy's man in the government. Yeah, Robert Gates. And it says Henry Kissinger, who we also know as a Knight of Malta, describes the shift in communism's fortunes this way, quote, "At one moment at the beginning of the 80s, it was as if communism might sweep all before it. At the next, as history measures time, communism was self-destructing," unquote. What happened to bring about this change is a story that begins with two men who shared a bold idea, a president and a pope. Now we're going to see how the Pope conquered communism. We'll be right back after these messages. Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half of Inquisition Update, and if you'd like to support this program, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. Please support First Amendment Radio. And if you wish to contact me by email, please do so. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. tom@seawaves.us. Now, before we get into the presidency of Ronald Wilson Reagan and how he helped the Vatican, the author takes this time to go into a brief intermission by giving us some very valuable pictures, photographs in this book. I regard many of these photographs as proof that Bible prophecy is fulfilled. True Bible prophecy is fulfilled, not the futurist facade, but the true Bible prophecy. It begins with a photograph, or a painting rather, of Jesuit priest John Carroll. This was the Jesuit priest that helped foment the Revolutionary War to separate the colonies from Protestant Great Britain and to secure religious liberty for Catholics, an extreme minority of the population during the colonial period. He was the first Jesuit priest literally orchestrating the Revolutionary War, and the founder of Jesuit Georgetown University, from which most of our politicians are educated. Jesuit priest John Carroll. You want to see a picture of Jesuit priest John Carroll? Many would regard him as the real founder of the United States of America. But Roman Catholics certainly do. Those knowledgeable Roman Catholics regard John Carroll as the man of America. This is their claim to America, through John Carroll. There's a painting of John Carroll. Then we move to another painting, this one depicting those who were gathered to the First Vatican Council in 1869. This was the council which, among other things, besides restating its war against Protestantism, this Jesuit-controlled council literally made the Pope God on earth by declaring him divine and infallible. Rather infallible, but along with that, the insinuation is that he's divine, because only God is infallible. It's a photograph of the Pope, Pope Pius IX, on his throne in front of the colonnade, the central colonnade there, Bernini's columns in the central nave of the St. Peter's Basilica, with images and idols standing all around. But above his head is this sunburst image with the all-seeing eye, depicted as a dove in this case, and all the Roman Catholic prelates seated around him. This is where we get the quote from the British Baron: "Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely." And that's the corruption that we're under today. Papal infallibility. This is why the government of the United States supports the papacy, fights its wars at yours and my expense to help conquer the rest of the world for the papacy. Now, here's another photograph. This a photograph, not a painting. This photograph depicts the signing of the Lateran Treaty of February 11th, 1929. This is where, and you heard Nicholas yesterday on Cross the Border in our joint session there. This is when the mortal wound was healed. This is when the papacy, who had been driven into exile, who had been overthrown basically by the Protestant Reformation, who was literally a beggar and a prisoner within the Vatican, was released, essentially, by Mussolini and his fascist dictator, his fascist regime. The papacy was freed not only to be the spiritual leader of the Catholics throughout Europe once again, but also a temporal king. He was restored to kingly status. He was given national sovereignty in the sovereign city-state of Vatican City. He became, through that being a king himself, qualified to also be the rule and reign over the kings of the earth. And steadily and slowly, especially with the United States' help, he is once again the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords in the world. This is a very critical time. This is Bible prophecy being fulfilled. The Lateran Treaty of February 11th, 1929, literally raising from the dead the papacy, after once being slain by the Protestant Reformation. Now, the Pope has to be risen from his grave by someone else. Okay? Jesus rose from the grave on his own, but the Antichrist has to be risen with the help of a human hand. And that hand came from the United States of America. And here is a photograph of Myron Taylor, the personal representative of President Roosevelt with Pope Pius VII. We've already discussed that in the book. There's photographic proof. Now here is another photograph of Allied troops under U.S. command by General Mark Clark in St. Peter's Square, June 1944. This is out of the Vatican's photographic archives. This is where the beast, the sea beast, and the image of the beast really make their first appearance. Allied troops under the command of U.S. General Clark in St. Peter's Square on June of 1944. Now here is what I consider to be the fall of Protestantism. What certainly the papacy regards as the fall of Protestantism. This is a photograph from way up high in the main dome of the St. Peter's Cathedral, beneath the columns, where the abomination of all abominations sits. This is a depiction of the Second Vatican Council in St. Peter's Basilica in 1962. This is when the papacy achieved the defeat of Protestantism with the indispensable help of futurism. This is after 200 years of false prophecy being taught in the Protestant churches, Jesuit prophecy being taught, futurist prophecy being taught, that the Pope is not the Antichrist, the papacy is not the Antichrist, but a single individual that doesn't arrive in the world scene until just 7 years before Christ returns, and he will sign a 7-year peace treaty with the Jews. In the midst of the week, after 3.5 years, cause the sacrifices and oblations to cease, and there will be your Antichrist, and that will open the door for the papacy then to become the Christ. Worry it not, for that diabolical lie, Vatican Council II, would never have been possible. Futurism destroyed Protestantism. Vatican Council II just claimed the victory. This is the ultimate victory for the papacy. A photograph of Vatican Council II in St. Peter's Basilica. Listen, these pictures are worth the price of the book alone. Now, here is a photograph of one of our recent discussions. This is a photograph of John Courtney Murray. He is the Jesuit priest who brought about this new idea that the Pope is the king of all religions, religious freedom, religious liberty. And everyone has the conscientious right to practice their own religion within certain bounds set by the Vatican. This is John Courtney Murray together with the American Pope, as I call him, Francis Cardinal Spellman. He was the Caped Crusader of the Vietnam War. He was the liaison, the secret liaison that was already running the U.S. government before Roman Catholic President Kennedy was seated in the Oval Office. Cardinal Spellman was literally the president of the United States during that period. He was the leader of the Papal Crusade in Vietnam, and he was also the leader, the United States leader of the against the communism in the Cold War. More is owed to Cardinal Spellman probably than any other Catholic that ever lived in this world, with the exception possibly of John Carroll. They could have made him Pope, but he chose rather to serve the church by running this country and its massive economic and foreign policy machinery to better the position of the papacy in the world. And he achieved his goals. Why they haven't sainted him yet is beyond me. Now here's another photograph of the current Pope at the time, Pope John the 23rd, together with Roman Catholic Mrs. John F. Kennedy. This is dated March 1962. And Mrs. Kennedy, as is required of all women under the subjection and authority of the papacy, to appear before the Pope wearing all black, from the neck all the way to the feet, and to wear a veil, a black veil, in submission to the Pope. Very poignant photograph. We say that John F. Kennedy was not controlled by the Vatican, and yet his wife certainly was. She demonstrated it by her appearance. Now, here's a photograph of Pope Paul VI in Yankee Stadium. Remember, this was the first pope to visit the United States, kissing the ground in his embarking onto the country, claiming it for the papacy, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He was the first pope who came to this country, was treated like a god by those in New York who control that city, and he was allowed to say a public mass in Yankee Stadium. Yankee Stadium, how appropriate. October 4th, 1965. Big period of time for the Roman Catholic Church, the 1950s and 1960s. Invaluable for the Catholic Church. Pope Paul VI in another photograph with President Richard Nixon. This is a White House photograph, and you will see also that Nixon is dressed in black. So is his wife, with a black veil, and in total submission to Pope Paul VI. And next, a man for whom I voted twice, and I will live the rest of my days in repentance. This is a photograph, excuse me. This is a photograph of a pretended Protestant, Ronald Wilson Reagan, eventually made an honorary 33rd degree Freemason and an honorary Knight of Malta. He renounced Christ by embracing Antichrist, and he served him loyally all of his presidency. He literally handed this country to the Pope on a silver platter. It was told to me that in his first meeting with Pope John Paul II in Fairbanks, Alaska, that Pope John Paul II berated President Ronald Wilson Reagan for the decadence of the United States, the materiality of the United States, materialism, and its wealth, while so many other people in the world were starving and in need. He criticized the United States for its military aggressiveness. Never mind that the United States military aggressiveness was commanded by the popes to help conquer the rest of the world. And after John Paul II had morally destroyed Ronald Wilson Reagan, the President of the United States, and the role the United States plays in the world, it is said to me that Ronald Reagan got off his chair and knelt before John Paul II and said, "Holy Father, I give you my country." And he did. Now, some may deny that that occurred, but certainly history proves that Ronald Reagan gave this country lock, stock, and barrel to the papacy. And if the United States served the papacy before, it never served it ever more than it did after Ronald Wilson Reagan became President of the United States. And we're going to talk about that subject next here in this book. Again, a photograph of President Ronald Wilson Reagan and Pope John Paul II on May 2nd, 1984 at the Fairbanks International Airport, Fairbanks, Alaska. It says this was the first meeting of President Reagan and Pope John Paul II after the establishment of formal diplomatic relations between the United States and the Holy See. That's where we got our formal diplomatic relations. The United States publicly acknowledged the Vatican as essential to national security, that it maintained formal diplomatic relations with the Holy See. This country was taken hostage, and it was given over to the papacy by Ronald Wilson Reagan. If I live to be 1,000 years, I will never more regret ever voting for Ronald Wilson Reagan for president. Here's a photograph of Pope Benedict XVI in Cuba, March 2012. Remember, Cuba was the one that threatened the United States with nuclear annihilation during the Cold War, during the Kennedy administration, during Vatican Council II, when the Protestants were surrendering. The Pope having excommunicated Fidel Castro in a move to exonerate or separate the papacy from what was going on in Cuba. He's hailed as a god on the streets of Cuba. Who's telling the truth? This photograph or the propagandists? Here's another photograph of the current author, Francis Rooney, together with Archbishop and now Cardinal Harvey in the Apostolic Palace. This is the formal diplomatic relations now with the Antichrist of the Bible. Another photograph of present author Francis Rooney and Pope Benedict XVI. Another photograph of a very depressing photograph. President George W. Bush, the Catholic crusader that led this world into a phony war based on the idea that Iraq and Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11, which was used as an excuse to go on a holy Roman crusade in the Middle East, in Iraq. George W. Bush lied to this country. George W. Bush, who was personally responsible for what happened on 9/11, knowing that it would lead this country into another crusade, that the American people would be fooled again. George W. Bush, who is personally responsible for conducting the events on September 11th, who served the Pope his entire presidency and still does so today, and who I expect will publicly convert to Roman Catholicism if he hasn't already. He is depicted in this photograph as giving a gift of a walking stick to Pope Benedict XVI, which was carved by a man by the name of Roosevelt Wilkerson, a homeless man in Dallas, Texas, the site of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And he's giving it to Pope Benedict XVI. Remember the walking stick? I've been a long time since I read the biblical account. It had all the names of the tribes of Israel. Well, that's what this is supposedly to depict. And it's President George W. Bush giving it to Pope Benedict XVI. What horror lies in these images. And the American people, for the most part, when they look at them with admiration, never knowing that it's their end. Another photograph of President George W. Bush with the current author, Ambassador Rooney, meeting with the community of San Egidio, no doubt another organization in service to the papacy. Another photograph of present author Rooney and his family with Pope Benedict XVI. And then yet another photograph of the Holy See's diplomatic corps. A large group of people in the Sistine Chapel. In front and center is seated Pope Benedict XVI. They're all the representatives of the Pope throughout the world. Pictures taken in the Apostolic Palace. The man of sin, the son of perdition, the biblical and historical and prophetic Antichrist, the historicist Antichrist, as opposed to the futurist lie. And the last photograph, and we'll begin with what little time's left in chapter 10. This is a photograph of the first Jesuit priest to become Pope of the Roman Catholic Church since their restoration in 1814. This is Cardinal Bergoglio before he became Pope, now Pope Francis I, washing feet at the Sarda Maternity Hospital in Buenos Aires, Argentina in 2005. This depicting the warrior of all warriors, Francis I, a criminal in Brazil and Argentina that oversaw the disappearance of thousands and thousands of Argentinians, were just loaded in helicopters, hauled out over the sea, and dumped overboard to drown. A man that oversaw the imprisonment of fellow Jesuits. A man that probably more than anybody has blasphemed the name of Almighty God and brought Christianity to destruction. Jorge Bergoglio, washing feet, and the world buys the lies. Now, chapter 10, it's entitled Parallel Interests. After all, the second beast does cause the whole world to worship the first beast. They have parallel interests. Begins with a quote from another Jesuit priest, F.R., which stands for Father in the Roman Catholic Church, Robert A. Graham. It was quoted in 1959. He says, overwhelmingly Catholic Poland, with its intense loyalty to the Holy See, will sooner or later edge closer to normal relations with the Vatican. In this eventuality, the communist government will find itself carried by forces which it cannot control. Now you know what the Jesuit agenda is for Poland and for communist Russia. He says one was a Polish priest from behind the Iron Curtain. The other was a movie star from Hollywood. Despite geography and vocation, Pope John Paul II and President Ronald Reagan shared a great deal in common. Both had been dark horse candidates for the positions they held. Both possessed streaks of disarming humor as well as serenity rare in men of high achievement. Both were charismatic performers and former actors. John Paul briefly considered a life in the theater as a young man. Most importantly, both came to power following years of tumult and confusion in their respective domains, and they quickly set clear paths toward the future, paths that led them, at first separately and then together, down a road that ended in the rubble of the Berlin Wall. Many people contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union, but no two were as indispensable as the President and the Pope. the second beast, and the first beast, respectively. The end of communism began during a remarkable year in Vatican history, 1978, the year of 3 popes. In early August, Pope Paul VI died, leaving behind a church revitalized but still preoccupied by the changes brought about by Vatican Council II. The following month, Paul's successor, John Paul I, died in apparent heart attack after just 34 days as Pope. The truth of the matter was he was assassinated, and this author fully well knows it. And he served 33 days, indicating who it was that assassinated him. Then, on October 16, 1978, the white smoke rose again from the chimney above the Sistine Chapel. A new pope had been chosen. Karl Wojtyła, former Archbishop of Krakow, Poland. The next domino to drop for the papacy, with the help of the United States of America. We'll talk about it tomorrow on Inquisition Update. Stay tuned for more godly programming on First Amendment Radio, and I'll see you tomorrow.